Zalema grew up surrounded by love and admiration in the village of Tandari. Her father, Babakiano, was a respected man, and her mother, Mama Fari, was known for her kindness and wisdom. Zalema inherited her mother's warmth and her father's strength, making her a beloved child in the village. She had a natural gift for storytelling and acting, often gathering the children of Tandari to perform plays she created. Her stories were full of magic, hope, and life lessons, and even the elders admired her talent. However, happiness in Tandari did not last forever. One fateful night, a sudden illness took Mama Fari's life. The house that once echoed with laughter became silent with grief. Babakiano, once a strong and lively man, became a shadow of himself. He tried his best to care for Zalema, but his heart was heavy, and loneliness consumed him. As the years passed, he decided to remarry, hoping to bring warmth back into their home. Saina arrived in Tandari with her daughter, Mora. At first, she seemed kind, treating Zalema like her own. She smiled sweetly and spoke gentle words, convincing Babakiano that she would be a good mother to his daughter. Mora, too, acted like a loving sister, always staying close to Zalema. For a while, it seemed that happiness had returned. But behind closed doors, Saina and Mora were different. They watched Zalema closely, their eyes filled with jealousy. They saw how the villagers adored her, how she shined in every performance, and how even Babakiano admired her intelligence and charm. One day, Babakiano fell seriously ill. He grew weak, unable to manage the household or protect his daughter. Saina saw this as her chance to take control. She started spreading lies, whispering to the villagers that Zalema was an ungrateful child who brought nothing but bad luck. Then, one night, she took all of Zalema's birth records and burned them in the fire. The next day, she presented new papers to the village chief, claiming that Mora was Babakiano's real daughter and that Zalema had no family ties to him. With Babakiano too sick to protest, the village accepted the false records. Just like that, Zalema's identity was stolen. Saina's cruelty did not stop there. She turned Zalema into a servant in her own home, making her cook, clean, and run errands, while Mora enjoyed the life that once belonged to her. Zalema's beautiful clothes were given to Mora, her books were taken away, and she was forbidden from performing her stories. Whenever Zalema protested, Saina would beat her and threaten her with worse punishments. She tried to plead with her father, but his mind was too clouded by illness to understand what was happening. As the years passed, Zalema endured humiliation and suffering. She became nothing more than a shadow, her name erased from the village records. Mora, meanwhile, was treated like a princess. The villagers, unaware of the truth, celebrated her as Babakiano's only daughter, praising her beauty and status. Zalema felt hopeless, but she refused to let her spirit break. Deep inside, she still held on to her stories, whispering them to herself at night as a reminder of who she truly was. One day, Saina made the final move to rid herself of Zalema forever. She struck a deal with a traveling merchant, selling Zalema as a servant in exchange for money. Without warning, Zalema was taken from Tandari, thrown into a cart, and carried away to an unknown fate. She screamed for help, but no one came. As the village disappeared behind her, she realized that she had lost everything: her family, her name, and her home. But deep in her heart, she made a silent promise. One day, the truth would come to light, and she would reclaim the life that was stolen from her. At first, Saina acted like a loving mother to Zalema. She spoke sweetly to her, gave her small gifts, and told Babakiano that she would care for her like her own daughter. Zalema, still mourning her mother's death, wanted to believe her. She tried to welcome Saina and Mora into their home, treating Mora like a sister. For a while, everything seemed peaceful, but Saina was not the kind woman she pretended to be. Deep down, she resented Zalema. She saw how the villagers adored the girl, how she had a natural grace and charm that made people love her. Worst of all, she saw that Babakiano's heart still belonged to his late wife, and that Zalema was a constant reminder of her. Saina wanted that love and attention for herself and Mora. As time passed, she became colder towards Zalema. She started finding faults in everything she did. If Zalema laughed too loudly, she scolded her. If she made a mistake, she punished her harshly. She made sure Babakiano never noticed, always pretending to be kind when he was watching. But the moment he looked away, her eyes burned with jealousy. Mora, spoiled by her mother's favoritism, followed her lead. She mocked Zalema, stole her things, and took pleasure in seeing her suffer. One fateful day, Baba Kiano fell seriously ill. His once strong body grew weak, and he could barely leave his bed. The illness took away his ability to manage the household, leaving everything in Saina's hands. She realized this was her chance to take everything from Zalema and make Mora the only daughter of the house. Late one night, while everyone was asleep, she took Zalema's birth records, letters from her mother, and every document that proved she was Baba Kiano's child. One by one, she threw them into the fire, watching as the flames devoured every trace of Zalema's true identity. The next morning, she forged new documents, replacing Zalema's name with Mora's. She took the papers to the village chief and, with false tears, claimed that there had been a mistake. She told him that Mora was, in fact, Baba Kiano's only daughter, and that Zalema was just a distant relative they had taken in. With Baba Kiano too sick to confirm the truth, the village accepted the false records. From that moment on, Zalema no longer existed. Her name was erased, her past stolen, and her place in the family taken by Mora. When Zalema woke up that day, she had no idea her entire life had been rewritten overnight. She still believed she was Baba Kiano's daughter, still thought she had a home. But Saina had already set her final plan in motion, and soon, Zalema would learn just how cruel the world could be. Zalema's life changed overnight. One day, she was Baba Kiano's beloved daughter, and the next, she was nothing more than a servant in her own home. Saina wasted no time in showing her true colors. She ordered Zalema to wake up before sunrise and clean the entire house. She was given the worst chores, scrubbing the floors, washing heavy clothes, and fetching water from the farthest well. If she made even the smallest mistake, Saina would slap her or pull her by the ear, reminding her that she was worthless. Mora, now living under Zalema's stolen identity, enjoyed a life of comfort and luxury. She wore the finest clothes, attended school, and was praised by the villagers as Baba Kiano's only daughter. People admired her beauty and grace, believing she had inherited her parents' best qualities. But behind closed doors, Mora was nothing like Zalema. She was lazy and cruel, always looking for ways to make Zalema's life harder. She would spill food on the floor just to watch Zalema clean it up, or she would rip her own dress and blame it on Zalema, so Saina would punish her. Zalema tried to fight back. She begged Baba Kiano to listen, to remember that she was his real daughter, but his sickness had weakened him so much that he barely understood what was happening around him. Saina controlled everything: his food, his medicine, and who was allowed to see him. Whenever Zalema tried to speak to him, Saina would push her away, telling Baba Kiano that she was just an ungrateful girl causing trouble. Baba Kiano, too weak to argue, would sigh and turn away. As months passed, Zalema lost all hope. She was no longer allowed to go to school. She had no friends, no one to defend her, and no way to escape. The villagers, believing Saina's lies, ignored her suffering. They pitied Mora, thinking she had lost her mother and was now burdened with a troublesome girl in her home. Even when Zalema cried in the streets, no one came to her aid. Then, one day, Saina decided it was time to get rid of Zalema for good. She struck a deal with a traveling merchant who was passing through the village. In exchange for a small bag of silver coins, she sold Zalema to him as a servant. Before Zalema could even process what was happening, she was dragged away, thrown onto a cart, and taken far from the only home she had ever known. As she looked back at Tandari, her heart ached with pain. She had lost everything: her family, her name, and her place in the world. But as the cart rumbled down the dusty road, she made a silent promise. One day, she would return, and the truth would be known. The journey to Kawari was long and exhausting. The merchant barely spoke to Zalema, treating her like nothing more than a piece of cargo. When they arrived in the bustling city, she was sold to a wealthy but cruel household. From dawn till night, she scrubbed floors, washed endless piles of clothes, and carried heavy baskets from the market. If she worked too slowly, she was beaten. If she spoke out of turn, she was slapped. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but there was no escape. Despite the hardship, Zalema never let go of her love for stories. At night, when the other servants were asleep, she would whisper tales to herself, reliving the magic of the stories she once told in Tandari. When she had small moments of freedom, she would sit by the kitchen door, watching the world outside. Kawari was unlike anything she had ever seen. Grand buildings, crowded streets, merchants selling colorful fabrics and spices, and performers entertaining crowds in the market square. One afternoon, while running an errand, Zalema found herself in the heart of the market. There, a group of children sat on the dusty ground, looking bored as they waited for their mothers to finish shopping. Without thinking, Zalema knelt beside them and began telling a story. Her voice was soft at first, but as she continued, it grew stronger, more confident. She acted out the characters, using her hands and expressions to bring them to life. The children were enchanted, their eyes wide with excitement. Passers-by stopped to listen, drawn in by her words. For the first time in years, Zalema felt like herself again. Among the crowd was an older woman with sharp eyes and a regal posture. This was Madame Nari, the most famous theatre director in Kawari. She watched Zalema with great interest, recognizing a rare talent in the young girl. When Zalema finished her tale, the crowd erupted in applause, but before she could slip away, Madame Nari stepped forward. "You have a gift," the woman said. "Tell me, child, where did you learn to tell stories like that?" Zalema hesitated. She was afraid to speak the truth, afraid of what might happen if she was caught talking to a stranger. But something in Madame Nari's eyes made her feel safe. "My mother taught me before she died," she whispered. Madame Nari studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Come with me," she said. "You don't belong in the streets. You belong on a stage." At first, Zalema thought it was a trick. No one had ever offered her kindness since she had been taken from Tandari. But Madame Nari was serious. She took Zalema into her home, giving her food, clean clothes, and a proper place to sleep. For the first time in years, Zalema wasn't treated as a servant. Instead, she was given a chance to learn. Under Madame Nari's guidance, Zalema trained day and night. She learned how to project her voice, how to move with grace, and how to capture the emotions of every story she told. It was hard work, but Zalema didn't complain. She pushed herself beyond her limits, determined to prove that she was more than just a forgotten girl. As time passed, Zalema's name began to spread. People talked about the young actress with the mesmerizing voice and the ability to make audiences laugh and cry. She performed in small plays, then larger ones, and soon she became known as one of the most talented storytellers in all of Kawari. But even as she gained fame and success, she never forgot the pain of her past. Deep inside, she still carried the wounds of betrayal, and she knew that one day she would have to return to Tandari, to the place where her story had truly begun. Years passed, and Zalema's name became known throughout Kawari. She performed in small plays at first, learning the ways of the stage, perfecting her expressions, and mastering the art of storytelling. Every time she stepped in front of an audience, she poured her heart into her performance, making people laugh, cry, and feel emotions they had never experienced before. But despite her growing reputation, she still struggled. The theatre world was competitive, and many doubted a simple girl with no family or noble background could ever become a true star. One day, everything changed. A famous playwright named Master Django was casting for a grand production, The Queen's Sacrifice, a story about a brave queen who gave up everything to save her people. It was the most anticipated play of the year, and only the best actresses in the city were considered. Zalema auditioned, pouring every ounce of her soul into her performance. When she finished, there was complete silence in the room. Then, Master Django stood up and declared, "She is the one. No one else can play this role." The play was a massive success. On opening night, the theatre was packed with nobles, merchants, and travelers who had heard whispers of a rising star. When Zalema stepped onto the stage, the audience held their breath. And when she spoke, it was as if time itself had stopped. She became the queen in the story, her voice filled with power, sorrow, and strength. By the time the final act ended, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. People wept, not because of the story alone, but because Zalema had made them feel every moment of it. From that night on, she was no longer just another actress. She was the actress. Her name spread beyond Kawari, reaching distant lands. People traveled from villages and cities just to watch her perform. She received invitations to act in the most prestigious theatres, and soon she was summoned to the capital by the king himself. With fame came wealth. Zalema, once a girl who had been treated as a servant, now lived in a grand home filled with fine clothes, jewelry, and servants of her own. Powerful people sought her company, and artists begged to paint her portrait. She had everything: admiration, riches, and influence. Yet, no matter how far she climbed, she never forgot where she came from. At night, when she was alone, she still thought of Tandari. She remembered the cruel hands of Sena, the mocking laughter of Mora, and the helpless look in Babakiano's eyes. They had stolen her name, her identity, and nearly her future, but they had failed. She had become something greater than they ever imagined, and one day she would return, not as a broken girl, but as a woman who had reclaimed her destiny. Zalema had performed in grand theatres, entertained nobles, and won the hearts of thousands, but nothing compared to the invitation she received one day. A letter arrived from the village of Tandari, requesting her presence for a special performance at their annual festival. It was the same village that had cast her out, the same place where she had been erased. Now, they were begging for her to return, not as a servant, but as the most famous actress in the land. For a long time, Zalema stared at the letter. She had dreamed of this moment, imagined what it would feel like to walk back into Tandari, with her head held high. The people who had ignored her suffering, who had believed Seina's lies, would now pay to watch her perform. More than anything, she wondered if Seina and Mora would be there. Would they recognize her? Or had they convinced themselves that she was truly gone forever? News of her upcoming performance spread quickly, reaching every corner of Tandari. The villagers were thrilled. They had heard tales of the great Zalema, the woman who could make audiences weep with a single story. Everyone wanted to see her, including Sina and Mora. Neither of them suspected the truth. To them, Zalema was long gone, sold to strangers never to be seen again. They had no idea that the girl they had betrayed had risen from the ashes and was returning as a star. On the night of the performance, the village square was packed. A grand stage had been built, and lanterns glowed softly in the evening light. People whispered excitedly as they took their seats. Seina and Mora arrived dressed in their finest clothes, eager to impress the important guests in attendance. Mora, who had lived her life as Zalema, sat confidently, believing she was the one who deserved admiration. Seina, as proud as ever, watched the stage, clueless about the storm about to strike. Then, Zalema stepped onto the stage. The moment she appeared, a hush fell over the crowd. She was dressed in a simple, flowing robe, her face hidden behind a golden mask. But it wasn't just her presence that captured their attention. It was her voice, deep, rich, and full of emotion. It sent chills down their spines. She began her story. It was a tale about a girl who was loved by her father, cherished for her beauty and wisdom. But when her mother died, her stepmother, consumed by jealousy, stole her identity. The girl was cast out, erased from existence, while another took her place, wearing her name like a stolen jewel. At first, Seina and Mora enjoyed the story, unaware of the trap unfolding before them. But as the tale continued, their smiles faded. The details were too familiar. The sick father, the forged papers, the stolen life. Mora's hands trembled. Seina's face turned pale. They stole quick glances at the villagers, who were whispering among themselves. People were beginning to connect the dots. Zalema's voice grew stronger, sharper. She told of the girl's suffering, her years of pain, her struggle to survive, and then her rise, her return. The girl who was cast aside had become greater than anyone had ever imagined. And now she had come back, not for revenge, but to reveal the truth. By the time Zalema finished speaking, there was dead silence. She reached up, removed her golden mask, and let the villagers see her face. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Seina's mouth fell open. Mora clutched her dress, shaking her head in disbelief. Babakiano, seated in the front row, let out a choked cry. The truth was out. Zalema had returned, and no lie could protect them now. The moment Zalema removed her mask, gasps filled the air. The villagers stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock. The beautiful actress standing before them was not a stranger. She was someone they had known long ago, someone they had forgotten. It was Zalema, the girl they had believed was lost forever. Mora clutched Seina's arm, her breath quick and uneven. It can't be, she whispered, shaking her head. But Seina knew. The truth hit her like a thunderbolt, making her legs weak. Her face lost all color, and she staggered back, unable to look away. The girl they had betrayed, the girl they had erased, was standing before them, more powerful and radiant than ever. Babakiano, who had been sitting silently in the front row, suddenly let out a trembling gasp. His old, weary eyes filled with tears as he struggled to his feet. He took a step forward, then another, as if afraid she might disappear. "Zalema, my child!" His voice cracked with emotion. Zalema turned to him, and for the first time in years, she saw him not as the sick, helpless man from her past, but as her father, the man who had once loved her deeply. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes, Baba, it's me." With a cry of relief, Baba Kiano rushed forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. He wept against her shoulder, holding her as if he would never let go again. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "Forgive me, my daughter. Forgive me for not seeing the truth." Zalema closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the warmth she had longed for all these years. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, she didn't need words. His tears, his trembling hands, his broken apology, they were enough. The villagers, still in shock, began murmuring among themselves. Whispers turned to murmurs, and murmurs turned to anger. They looked at Sena and Mora with disgust, realizing what had been done. They had been deceived for years, believing in a lie, while the real Zalema had suffered. Sena fell to her knees, her hands shaking. She opened her mouth to speak, to plead, but no words came out. She had spent years hiding the truth, but now, in front of the entire village, she had nowhere left to run. The truth had finally caught up with her. The moment the truth was revealed, the village erupted in anger. The people who had once admired Sena and Mora now looked at them with disgust. Whispers turned into shouts as the villagers pieced together what had happened. Sena had stolen Zalema's identity, lied to everyone, and cast out an innocent girl. Mora had lived a life of comfort, while the real Zalema had suffered. Mora, once proud and confident, shrank back in fear. She clutched her fine dress as if it could protect her from the angry stares around her. "It wasn't my fault," she stammered. "I only did what my mother told me." But no one believed her. The villagers had seen her enjoy the life that was never meant for her. She had accepted the praise, the riches, the love that belonged to someone else, and she had never once questioned it. Sena, who had always been so proud, fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Zalema's feet. "Please, my daughter," she begged. "Forgive me. I was blinded by jealousy. I only wanted what was best for Mora. Please have mercy." Zalema looked down at the woman who had once ruled over her life with cruelty. There was a time when she had feared Sena, when she had been powerless against her. But now, Zalema was no longer a helpless girl. She was strong, wise, and powerful. She had survived the worst, and she had risen above it all. She took a deep breath, then shook her head. "You are not my mother," she said firmly. "You never were." Her voice was calm, but unwavering. "You stole my life, my family, my name, and now the truth is out. No more lies, no more deception." The villagers didn't wait for Zalema's judgment. They had already decided. Sena and Mora had shamed their community, and they would not be allowed to stay. One by one, the people turned their backs on them. Mora's friends, the ones who had always praised her, stepped away in silence. Even those who had once admired Sena now looked at her with cold eyes. With no one left to protect them, Sena and Mora were cast out of Tandari. They had spent years living in wealth and comfort, but now they had nothing. No home, no riches, no respect. As they walked away from the village, their heads bowed in shame, Zalema watched them go, not with hatred, but with the quiet satisfaction that justice had finally been served. With Sena and Mora gone, the village slowly returned to peace. But Zalema knew that justice alone was not enough. She had spent years fighting to reclaim her identity, but she didn't want her story to end with punishment. She wanted to create something meaningful, something that would last beyond her own success. Using the wealth she had earned as an actress, Zalema decided to build a theatre school in Tandari. She wanted to give young girls the chance to learn storytelling, acting, and performance, skills that had once saved her life. She knew there were many children in the village with talent, but no opportunity. She wanted them to have a place where they could dream, just as she had once dreamed. The villagers watched in awe as the school was built. They had once turned their backs on Zalema, but now they saw her for who she truly was, a woman of strength, kindness, and wisdom. Mothers brought their daughters to her, eager for them to learn. Fathers who had once ignored her suffering now praised her for her generosity. The same village that had once abandoned her now celebrated her return. Zalema became more than just a famous actress. She became a symbol of resilience and hope. People spoke of her story not just as a tale of betrayal, but as proof that the truth could never be buried forever. No matter how much someone tries to erase you, no matter how much they take from you, the truth will always find its way back. As the years passed, the school grew, and so did Zalema's legacy. She watched as young girls stood on the stage, telling their own stories, their voices strong and full of confidence. She knew that she had done something greater than just reclaiming her past. She had built a future for others, and in that, she found her true victory. As time passed, Zalema's name became more than just a memory in Tandari. It became a legend. The villagers who had once turned away from her suffering now spoke of her with admiration. Parents told their children her story, not just as a tale of betrayal, but as a lesson in strength and justice. Zalema had come back not to seek revenge, but to bring light to a place that had once cast her into darkness. Her theatre school flourished, and many young girls found joy and purpose in storytelling. They looked up to Zalema, inspired by her journey from a forgotten servant to the most famous actress in the land. Even those who had once ignored her in the past now stood in awe of her wisdom and kindness. But while Zalema's life was filled with success and purpose, Sena and Mora faced a very different fate. Cast out of the village, they wandered from place to place, but no one wanted to take them in. Mora, who had once lived a life of luxury under a stolen name, struggled to survive without the wealth and comfort she had always known. Sena, once proud and controlling, had lost everything: her status, her power, and the trust of the people. They realized too late that no lie could last forever. The truth had found its way back, and with it came the weight of their actions. There was no escape from the shame that followed them. Wherever they went, people whispered about their deceit, their cruelty, and the daughter they had wronged. Zalema never wasted her time thinking about them. She had already won, not through revenge, but by rising above the pain they had caused. She had built something greater than their betrayal, a life of purpose, love, and truth. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all.